Hey guys, tonight we step into the cold, smoky air of a Viking settlement where the crackle of firewood meets the salty scent of the sea, and the very shadows around you seem to whisper stories you probably won't survive this. You trudge through mud mixed with straw and animal dung, the thick smell of roasting meat mingling with the sharp chill of the northern wind slipping through cracks in wooden walls. Somewhere beyond, the ocean rumbles like a sleeping beast, and the howl of distant wolves pierces the silence. The Vikings live hard and loud, raiders, traders, farmers, but beneath the bravado there are shadows deeper than nightfall, fears sharper than any axe. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? Maybe you're cozy under blankets somewhere warm while we wander the cold north together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey begins in a Viking world that isn't just about sword fights and longships cutting through waves. No, this is a world where every creak in the dark might mean something unseen, and the thin veil between the known and unknown feels just a whisper away from tearing. The Vikings built their lives around the harsh rhythms of nature, severe winters, unpredictable seas, scarce crops. But the forces they feared most often lurked beyond what they could see or fight head-on. Imagine standing on the edge of a fjord, the sky smeared with the last light of day, a wolf's distant cry making your skin crawl. You've just finished your day's work, mending nets, tending goats, sharpening weapons, but in your chest, there's a knot that no ale can unknot. What if the sea turns against you? What if the gods don't hear your prayers? What if the cold takes your children in the night? This knot is the seed of fear, and for Vikings, fear wasn't just about monsters or enemies. It was survival's pulse in the dark. You probably picture Vikings as fearless warriors charging into battle, horned helmets and all. Side note, no actual horns. Sorry to burst that cinematic bubble. But beneath their hardened skin was an intimate, constant dance with fear. Fear was practical. It saved lives by sharpening senses and forging caution. And in the Viking world, fear was complex, woven into daily rituals, woven into myths, and even into the laughter around the mead hall fire. Historians still argue whether Viking fear was more a reflection of their environment or their deeply spiritual worldview. Was it the brutal Nordic climate that shaped their anxieties? Or did their belief in gods and monsters twist that anxiety into vivid nightmares? Probably a bit of both. They knew well that nature was unforgiving, but they also believed invisible forces, fate, magic, and wrathful spirits, were just as deadly. For example, your typical Viking village was no fortress. The longhouses were wooden, vulnerable to fire and weather. The landscape offered predators and enemies alike plenty of places to hide. That wolf howl? It might be a real beast or a restless spirit. The sea, a provider and executioner. And the cold, a thief in the night stealing warmth, food, and hope. All this carved a world where fear wasn't weakness. It was a survival tool. And fear showed in rituals, too. You might have seen a Viking clutching a carved amulet, perhaps Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, not just a fashion statement, but a talisman against the unseen. Or maybe a seer whispering cryptic warnings by firelight, claiming the runes foretold doom. The Vikings sought to hold back fear's darkness with stories, with gods, and with tangible signs. Magic and superstition weren't quaint. They were lifelines. Now, here's a quirky tidbit for you. Vikings reportedly used a kind of sunscreen made from crocodile dung to protect their skin during summer voyages. Whether that's a practical joke or a real, somewhat gross historical fact, it shows how resourceful and, frankly, desperate they were to survive the elements. If they were worried about sunburn, imagine how much more they feared storms, or worse, being stranded on a ship with no wind and no food. So here you stand, listening to the crackle of fire and the distant crash of waves, feeling that mix of awe and unease that defined the Viking spirit. Their fear was never about giving up. It was about pushing through, preparing, and confronting the unknown every dawn. We'll dive deeper from here, into the gods they prayed to, the monsters they imagined, and the real dangers waiting in shadowed forests and icy seas. But for now, just hold on to that knot of fear in your chest, because that's the heart of their story. Welcome to the Viking world at dawn. You carry that knot of fear with you as the morning light creeps through the mist, and the names of gods and monsters flicker in your mind like shadows cast by a fire. Norse mythology isn't just bedtime stories for the Vikings. It's the very framework through which they understand their fears and hopes. Picture a world where gods walk among giants, where frost and fire battle endlessly, and where the fate of everything hangs by a thread. This is the cosmos that shapes what you dread and what you pray for. At the center of this sprawling mythological web stands Odin, the all-seeing, one-eyed god of war and wisdom. You might imagine him as a distant deity perched high in Asgard, but for Vikings, Odin was personal, a god who demanded sacrifice and cunning, yet promised glory to those who died bravely in battle. The fear of dying dishonorably, missing out on Valhalla's feasts and eternal battles, haunts you like a shadow. You know that if you die of illness or old age, you might end up in hell, the cold underworld ruled by a grim goddess, where the air tastes like ash and the light never warms. But it's not just gods who worry you. The giants, Jotnar, are monstrous beings embodying chaos and destruction. These towering, sometimes grotesque creatures lurk beyond the realms of men and gods, often at war with the divine. You imagine them as wild, unpredictable forces of nature, frost giants from frozen wastelands, fire giants from molten depths. Their presence is a reminder that the universe isn't safe or stable. It's a battlefield of opposing powers constantly threatening to unravel. Historians still argue whether these myths served more as entertainment or as psychological armor against the real horrors Vikings faced. Some say the vivid stories helped people make sense of chaos, giving form to abstract fears of death, nature, and fate. Others believe the gods and monsters were real in a spiritual sense, forces that needed to be appeased lest disaster strike. Either way, these tales shaped your daily rituals and your understanding of the world's fragility. Now, here's a fun twist. Some Viking myths describe the wolf Fenrir, a monstrous beast so terrifying that even the gods feared him. This wolf is destined to break free during Ragnarok, the apocalypse, and devour Odin himself. So, every time you see a wolf's silhouette against the moonlit sky, you might feel a shiver. It's not just a wild animal. It's a symbol of inevitable doom. You probably won't invite Fenrir to dinner. There's also Loki, the trickster god, who embodies chaos and unpredictability. He can help or harm, often simultaneously, and his mischief brings both laughter and dread. You wonder, as the stories go, if some of your own misfortunes come from Loki's meddling, because in the Viking mind, the universe is as tricky and unstable as the god himself. The imagery of gods battling giants mirrors your everyday struggles, the cold versus warmth, order versus chaos, life versus death. When you look at the roaring sea or the frozen peaks, you don't just see nature, you see a cosmic war. The fear of losing that war lingers in your bones, reminding you why you must fight, pray, and survive. You wear Thor's hammer around your neck, not just as a symbol of strength, but as a shield against these colossal fears. Thor is the protector god, wielder of the mighty Mjolnir, whose hammer can shatter mountains and monsters alike. But even Thor's protection feels fragile when the frost giants gather, or when the sky darkens with storm clouds heavy with death. This blending of myth and reality colors how you interpret every shadow and sound. The screech of an owl might be a messenger of death. A sudden gust of wind might be a giant's breath. You see the hand of fate weaving through your days, and gods playing dice with your life. Historians still debate the extent to which Viking mythology influenced actual Viking behavior. Did belief in these gods inspire courage, or did it deepen the dread of what might come? Probably both. Your fear is tempered by hope. If you live honorably and fight bravely, the gods might welcome you to an endless feast after death. But the uncertainty, the unknown, is always there, a weight you carry alongside your axe. And for a quirky side note, some scholars suggest the Vikings may have used hallucinogenic mushrooms in certain rituals, perhaps to glimpse the worlds of gods and giants. So that eerie, dreamlike state you might have during a feast wasn't just from mead. It could have been a little cosmic trip into the realm of fear and wonder. So, as you wrap your cloak tighter and step into the cold dawn, remember that your fears aren't just about monsters or enemies. They're woven into the very fabric of your existence, held up by gods and giants, and the endless dance of fate. The Viking mind is a tapestry of myth and reality, where every fear has a story, and every story feeds the fire of survival. You step further into this world where death is never far, sometimes waiting just beyond the longhouse door or lurking beneath the waves. Death, for Vikings, isn't merely the end. It's a complex journey wrapped in fear, hope, and fierce pride. You carry the knowledge that your fate after death depends heavily on how you lived and died, which twists the knife of anxiety sharper than any enemy's blade. Imagine standing beside a fallen comrade, his blood soaking into the earth, his breath fading as he crosses into the unknown. You wonder, will his soul be welcomed into Valhalla, Odin's hall of warriors who feast and fight until the end of days? Or will he be condemned to hell, a shadowy realm ruled by the grim goddess Hel, where spirits dwell in cold, joyless silence? For a Viking, dying a warrior's death isn't just brave, it's the only way to avoid the horror of oblivion. Valhalla itself is a terrifyingly vivid place in your mind. It's not a soft, peaceful afterlife, but a massive hall filled with endless battles, raucous feasts, and the clanging of weapons. Here, death isn't final. It's part of a never-ending cycle of combat and revelry, where even wounds heal by morning. You probably won't sign up for a quiet retirement after death. The Vikings would rather die loudly, fighting under Odin's gaze. But not everyone expects such glory. Those who die from sickness or old age are thought to travel to Helheim, the underworld where the atmosphere is cold, dreary, and lonely. This place isn't hellfire and brimstone like later Christian tales, but it's still bleak, a fate that sends shivers down your spine on a long, dark winter's night. You might imagine yourself wandering a frozen landscape with only the whisper of ghosts and the chill in your bones. Historians still argue whether the Vikings' obsession with heroic death was as widespread as the sagas suggest, or if it was mostly the elite warrior class who dreamed of Valhalla, while the rest of the population faced a quieter, humbler afterlife. Either way, the fear of an ignoble death, a death without honor or memory, was a shadow stalking every Viking's footsteps. Your own funeral is a source of both dread and hope. The idea of a ship burial, where your body is sent off to sea on a burning vessel, is dramatic and awe-inspiring, but also terrifying. Imagine the flames licking the sky as your loved ones watch, the smoke twisting like a signal to the gods above. You might wonder if this fiery farewell will truly secure your passage to the afterlife, or just mark the final goodbye. Here's a quirky note. Some Vikings reportedly placed small boats with their dead, loaded with goods and sometimes animals, believing this would help the departed navigate the watery road to the next world. You might chuckle at the idea of taking your pet goat along for the ride, but in a way, it's deeply human, a hope that even in death, you won't face the unknown alone. Death wasn't always distant or abstract. It came often and suddenly. Plague, battle wounds, accidents, all could snatch life in a heartbeat. The Viking belief system gave a framework to make sense of this randomness. Fate, or word, was a fixed thread woven by the Norns, three mystical women who spun, measured, and cut the strands of life. You have no control over your fate, only the courage to meet it. This fatalism might feel bleak, but it also steels you. Knowing the Norns have already spun your thread means fear is not about avoiding death. It's about meeting it head-on, with dignity. Yet that knot in your chest tightens whenever you think about the unpredictability of it all. Historians still debate how much this belief in fate shaped Viking behavior. Did it lead to reckless bravery or careful calculation? You can imagine both. Sometimes, embracing fate means charging boldly into battle. Other times, it means using all your wits to survive another day. And here's a light touch to the heavy theme. The Vikings had a goddess named Skuld, one of the Norns, who was also a Valkyrie tasked with choosing who would die in battle. So essentially, your fate might have been decided by a divine matchmaker of death. It's like the universe's ultimate blind date, but with a sword. Your ancestors likely told stories of great heroes who defied death, only to be finally claimed at the perfect moment. These tales weren't just entertainment, they were guides, a way to find meaning in the chaos of life and death. As you pull your cloak tighter against the cold, you feel the weight of these beliefs settling in. Death isn't a distant concept. It's a constant companion, a force to be respected and feared. But it's also a doorway to honor, legacy, and a place among the gods, if you are lucky enough to claim it. So as you ready your spear and steel yourself for the coming day, remember, the Vikings' greatest fear isn't death itself, but dying without a story to tell. You step out onto the creaking dock where the salty air bites at your face and the horizon stretches wide, a vast, unpredictable ocean that holds both promise and terror. The sea is a living force in your world, a mother and a monster, generous yet unforgiving. It's the lifeblood of Viking raids and trade, but also the source of sleepless nights and whispered prayers. You know that beyond those rolling waves lies not just new lands, but death itself. The ocean's power is immediate and primal. You've seen storms rise like angry gods, turning your sturdy longship into a helpless toy tossed by whitecaps and roaring winds. Waves slam over the sides, the smell of salt water mixing with fear and sweat. Your hands grip the oars or the tiller, knuckles white, heart pounding. The sea doesn't just threaten your body, it gnaws at your spirit. You probably won't survive a storm like this without the gods' mercy, or sheer luck. The sea has its own creatures to haunt your nightmares. Beyond the fish and whales, stories tell of the kraken, a colossal beast said to drag entire ships to watery graves. Sailors whisper of sea serpents coiling beneath the waves, of ghostly ships sailing silent and unseen. These aren't just tales to scare children. They're warnings born of real dangers that no man's sword can fend off. Historians still argue whether the kraken was a real giant squid misremembered or a symbol of the sea's unknowable terror. Either way, the fear of these unseen monsters shaped how Vikings approached the water. You don't just row or sail, you watch, listen, and pray, because the ocean is alive with dangers both natural and supernatural. And here's a quirky tidbit to ease the tension. Vikings sometimes used ravens to navigate, releasing the birds to see where they'd fly and lead the ship to land. It's a bit like outsourcing your GPS to a slightly unpredictable feathered co-pilot, trustworthy, but only if the bird feels like cooperating. But it's not only the sea's creatures that frighten you. The ocean itself can turn against you without warning. A calm day can give way to deadly fog, making navigation nearly impossible. The cold water promises a swift death if you fall in. Hypothermia sets in within minutes. You imagine the terror of being stranded, alone on a broken plank, or swallowed by waves, your cries lost to the wind. Your ship is your sanctuary and your coffin. Built from wood, stitched together with iron rivets and pitch, it's strong but fragile against the sea's might. You know that even the best-built vessel can be torn apart by storms or run aground on hidden rocks. Every voyage carries the possibility of sinking, and with it, the loss of everything. Vikings believed that the sea was ruled by supernatural forces. The goddess Ran, with her net, could drag sailors beneath the waves, claiming their souls. You can almost hear the splash and the eerie silence after, imagining her cold fingers pulling you into the depths. To appease Ran and other sea spirits, you might leave offerings or say prayers before sailing. This belief gave the ocean a terrifying personality, a will of its own that demanded respect and sacrifice. Ignoring it was courting death. Historians still debate how much these sea beliefs influenced Viking navigation and risk-taking. Did fear keep them cautious, or spur them to challenge the sea's limits? Probably both. The ocean was the ultimate test of Viking courage, skill, and faith. And a final fun fact. Vikings are thought to have used something like sunstones, crystals that could locate the sun's position even on cloudy days, to help navigate. Imagine trusting a piece of rock to guide you safely across thousands of miles of deadly ocean. It's a mix of science, superstition, and sheer daring. So, as you gaze out over the restless waves, feeling the salt spray on your skin, remember, the sea is never just water. It's a living threat, a goddess's domain, a realm of monsters and mystery. It is the fearsome heart of the Viking world, demanding courage, respect, and a little bit of madness to survive. You lean into the wind, eyes squinting against the spray as your longship cuts through cold northern waters. Ahead lies the unknown, a horizon that promises new lands, but also hidden dangers that no map can show. Beyond the familiar fjords and coasts, the world stretches vast and mysterious, full of shadows that prick your skin with unease. This unknown is not just empty space, it's a dark, breathing presence that challenges your courage and survival instincts. The Vikings' explorations took them to lands barely whispered about, the icy reaches of Greenland, the wild shores of Vinland, even strange, fog-draped isles no one quite understood. Sailing there meant confronting the very limits of your knowledge and facing whatever lurked beyond human sight. You probably won't make it back if you misjudge the currents, the winds, or the spirits guarding these uncharted waters. Those lands beyond the maps are thick with danger, real and imagined. You hear tales of fierce tribes with strange customs, forests where spirits wander, and creatures that don't appear in any sagas. The Viking mind, honed on storytelling, fills these unknown places with giants, trolls, and shape-shifting beings that test both body and soul. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly encountered all these mysterious beings, or if many stories were ways to explain natural dangers and cultural differences. Either way, the fear of the unknown made every voyage a gamble with fate. One vivid example is the concept of the border, a liminal space where the natural world bleeds into the supernatural. Crossing a river, entering a dark forest, or sailing beyond the horizon could mean stepping into this other world. You imagine the sudden silence, the twisted trees, and the eyes watching from shadows. It's a place where normal rules don't apply, and where the brave can quickly become lost. The Viking explorers knew that unknown lands were not just physical territories, but psychological frontiers. They tested your nerves and your spirit. You might tell yourself you're seeking glory, but deep down, part of you fears what you cannot see or control. Here's a quirky side note. Some sagas mention draugr, undead beings who haunt burial mounds and can rise to terrorize the living. If you stumble into unknown lands or disturb ancient graves, you risk awakening these restless dead. So maybe don't dig too greedily, yeah? And what about the fear of the thin places, where the veil between worlds is thinnest. These spots were feared as gateways to the supernatural, and you'd likely avoid camping there at night, whispering prayers to keep harmful spirits at bay. The land itself could be hostile, not just because of wild animals or hostile tribes, but because of unseen forces. Historians still debate whether Vikings viewed the world's edges as merely physical, or if they carried profound spiritual significance, embodying the boundary between life and death, order and chaos. You can see how both ideas would create a mix of excitement and dread. So as your ship drifts ever further into the mist, your grip tightens on the oar, and your heart beats to the rhythm of waves and whispers. The unknown isn't just out there. It's inside you, a swirling tempest of fear and curiosity that pushes you forward and holds you back all at once. Your ancestors may have charted these uncharted waters, but each journey carried a question. Will the new land bring riches, or will it be your grave? You sit by the fire as dusk settles, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the wooden walls. Around you, the murmurs of seers and rune readers ripple through the gathering. Magic isn't just a tale told by old women. It's a tangible force threading through your life, as real and potent as the steel in your sword. You know that unseen powers can twist fate, heal wounds, or curse a clan to ruin, and that knowledge stirs a quiet, gnawing fear deep inside. Runes carved into wood or bone are more than letters. They're keys to the invisible world. You trace the ancient symbols on your amulet, hoping it will protect you from harm, from enemies, and from curses whispered in the dark. The fear isn't just of physical attack, but of unseen malice, witchcraft, hexes, and the shadowy workings of sorcerers known as vulvas. These women wield magic through chanting and rituals, commanding spirits and influencing fate itself. You probably won't recognize when a curse is laid upon you until it's too late. Magic in Viking culture is a gray area, part practical, part terrifying mystery. You might seek the seer's guidance before a raid, hoping the runes will reveal the right path. But you also fear that someone might use sorcery against you, twisting luck and health. This invisible battlefield of magic is as real as any sword fight. Historians still argue whether magic was widely believed in, or if it was mostly a tool of social power wielded by a few. Regardless, the fear of curses and enchantments shaped much of Viking daily life. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings believed that carrying a piece of a wolf's tooth or wearing a raven feather could ward off evil spirits. It's like nature's own little security system, slightly creepy, but reassuring. And it wasn't just defensive. Magic could be used to influence love, fertility, and even to sneakily sabotage rivals. You imagine whispered spells that could cause nightmares or sickness. The fear of being bewitched or outmaneuvered in this invisible way created a paranoia that was hard to shake. The boundary between the natural and supernatural is thin, and you constantly watch for signs, strange dreams, sudden chills, or animals behaving oddly. The vulvas, with their ritual chants and trance-like states, were feared and respected as conduits to those hidden realms. You might think of them as powerful allies or dangerous threats, depending on where your fate lies. Historians still debate whether the vulvas were primarily spiritual leaders or wielders of real magical power, but for Vikings, their presence was undeniable and their influence pervasive. Imagine sitting through a seer's reading, the room thick with incense and tension, as they lay out the runes that foretell your future, each symbol a thread in the tapestry of fate, some promising victory, others hinting at death or betrayal. The fear of these prophecies shapes your decisions, even if you want to ignore them. And a lighter note, Vikings used something called galder, chants or spells that sounded like eerie songs. You can almost hear the chanting rising and falling around the fire, a sound that could comfort or terrify depending on who wielded it. So, as the night deepens and shadows grow long, you hold your amulet tight, whisper a prayer or a chant, and hope the magic around you is on your side. Because in a world where enemies can be both seen and unseen, where fate is spun by distant hands, magic is both a shield and a sword, and your greatest fear might be losing its protection. The sun rises and you find yourself sharpening your axe, the metal cold and steady under your hands. Yet, your mind isn't on the tool, but on the foes who might soon stand before you. Not just any enemies, but rival warriors who carry not only weapons, but the weight of grudges and cunning. Vikings feared these foes not just for their strength, but for their cleverness, their ruthlessness, and the bitter histories they carried into battle. Your enemies are a mix of known clans and distant raiders, some famed for brute force, others for guerrilla tactics and ambushes in dense forests or narrow fjords. You remember tales of the Vikings, a legendary mercenary brotherhood reputed for their discipline and brutality. Facing them isn't just a matter of muscle, it's a test of strategy, courage, and nerve. You probably won't outsmart a Viking in their home territory. Warfare among Vikings wasn't just a chaotic brawl. It involved intricate alliances, betrayals, and psychological warfare. Enemies might send threatening messages, display heads on stakes, or use stealthy night raids to unsettle you. The fear wasn't just of the battle itself, but of the cruelty that came before and after. Historians still argue how much Viking combat was ritualized versus practical. Some say battles followed strict codes and ceremonies, while others highlight the brutal and chaotic reality. Either way, the fear of enemy warriors was palpable and ever-present. A quirky detail: some Viking warriors wore bear or wolf pelts, believing these animal spirits granted them strength and ferocity in battle. You might picture a terrifying berserker, eyes wild, covered in fur and madness, charging without fear, both inspiring and terrifying to friend and foe alike. But it's not just about facing known enemies. The Vikings also feared unknown raiders, pirates who might strike suddenly and vanish into the night. These ghostly foes preyed on isolated farms and small settlements, their unpredictability breeding a constant unease. The fear of being attacked while unprepared weighed heavily, especially during winter months when supplies were low and warriors fewer. You imagine the tension of sleepless nights, the watchmen scanning dark horizons for flickers of torchlight. Historians debate whether Vikings themselves were the primary threat, or if foreign invaders posed greater dangers at times. You can see how both could be true, depending on the shifting political and social landscapes. And a fun fact to lighten the mood: some Viking battles were decided by holmgang, a duel between two champions to settle disputes and avoid larger bloodshed. It's like an ancient version of settling a fight with a rock-paper-scissors game, but with swords. Facing enemy warriors meant more than survival. It meant protecting your honor, your family, and your place in the clan. The fear was not just of death, but of defeat and disgrace. So as you tighten your grip on your axe and ready your shield, remember, your greatest enemy might be the one who knows your weaknesses and isn't afraid to use them. You sit around the flickering fire, the shadows dancing on weathered faces, and you remember the last time you trusted a friend and got stabbed in the back. Betrayal isn't just a story told to scare children. It's a knife twisted deep in the Viking soul. You know all too well that in a world where alliances can shift like the wind, the greatest fear isn't the sword you see, but the one hidden in your own circle. Broken oaths cut sharper than any blade. You might have pledged loyalty to a chieftain, a kin, or a fellow warrior, only to find their promises evaporate like mist when you need them most. This fear lives in every glance sideways, every whispered conversation behind your back. Who can you trust when your survival depends on unbreakable bonds? You probably won't survive long if your allies become your enemies overnight. The Vikings had a fierce code of honor, drengskaper, that demanded loyalty, courage, and truthfulness. But human nature being what it is, betrayal was common and dreaded. Blood feuds could erupt from a single slight or broken word, dragging entire families and clans into cycles of vengeance. The fear of betrayal wasn't just personal, it was communal, threatening the very fabric of Viking society. Historians still argue how strict Viking honor codes really were, and how often they were broken. Was the ideal of loyalty a guiding star, or just a convenient myth to justify violence? Probably a mix of both, but the consequences were very real and very feared. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Vikings used blood oaths, binding agreements sealed by cutting one's palm and mixing blood. Imagine the intensity and the fear of breaking such a pact. Once made, the betrayal wasn't just political, it was a personal, spiritual crime. Betrayal could come in many forms, refusing to come to aid in battle, selling secrets to enemies, or even poisoning a rival. You might have felt the cold dread when rumors spread that your closest friend had been talking to your enemies, or worse, plotting against you. The fear of being abandoned in battle was especially terrifying. Warriors knew that a lone fighter was a dead one. You remember the stories of last stands where comrades fled, leaving heroes to fall alone. That kind of betrayal scars deeper than any wound. Historians debate how much Viking alliances were fluid versus firm. Were loyalties often pragmatic and temporary, or did a true Viking clan hold together through thick and thin? Both versions carry their own fears and heartbreaks. And a lighter note to ease the tension. Some sagas humorously recount tricksters and deceivers who caused chaos, reminding us that betrayal isn't always deadly serious. Sometimes it's just mischief gone wrong. In a world where survival depends on trust, the shadow of betrayal is a constant companion. You learn to watch not only your enemies but your friends, to read hidden meanings in words and deeds, and to guard your heart as fiercely as your sword. So as you lay your head down tonight, remember, your greatest enemy might just be the one who smiled at you yesterday. You wake to a chill not from the wind, but from the whisper of illness that has crept through your village like an unseen ghost. Disease, invisible and relentless, is a terror that no shield can block and no sword can fend off. You watch as neighbors weaken and fall, the dread of contagion gripping your heart tighter than any battle rage ever could. This is a fear not just of death, but of the slow, creeping loss of life and community. Plagues and fevers sweep through settlements with cruel efficiency, striking down the young, the old, and the strong alike. You remember the tales of Black Death centuries later. But even in your Viking age, sickness was a known and terrible foe. There's no glory in dying from fever or infection, only a grim acceptance of fate's harshness. You probably won't survive an epidemic without the gods' mercy or the healer's touch. Medical knowledge is limited, and healing comes wrapped in a mix of herbal lore, superstition, and prayer. The local wise woman might brew bitter teas or chant spells, but often it's a race against time. The fear of sickness isn't just about physical pain. It's about the helplessness of watching loved ones fade, unable to fight back. Historians still argue how Vikings treated diseases. Was it mostly superstition, or did they have practical herbal remedies passed down through generations? Likely a blend of both. But the dread of contagion shaped many social practices, from quarantine-like isolation to ritual cleansing. A quirky note. Vikings sometimes used animal fats and herbs as poultices and believed that certain plants like juniper or rowan had protective powers against illness. Imagine rubbing gooey mixtures on a wound while whispering a prayer to the gods, half science, half hope. Disease didn't discriminate. Whether from battle wounds festering or infections spreading in close quarters, it was a constant threat. Your fear deepens knowing that the crowded longhouse, with its shared hearth and tight quarters, could become a breeding ground for sickness. You also fear the social stigma that illness might bring. Being seen as weak, or worse, cursed by the gods for some unseen sin. The invisible enemy cuts not just the body, but the spirit and reputation. Historians debate whether Viking burial practices, such as isolated graves or specific rites, were partly designed to prevent the spread of disease or to honor the dead. You can see how both fears and respect for the departed intertwined. And here's a light-hearted touch. Some Vikings believed that garlic could ward off evil spirits and sickness, so maybe you'd find yourself sniffing a clove or two, not just to keep vampires away, but to feel a little safer. As you nurse a fever or tend a sick child, you realize that this fear is universal and timeless, an enemy you fight silently, often alone, with hope as your only weapon. So as the shadows lengthen and the night brings quiet, remember that some fears don't roar like battle cries, but whisper through the thin walls of your home, and those fears are just as real. You wake to the soft crunch of frost underfoot, the sharp bite of cold air stinging your cheeks as winter wraps its iron grip around the land. The dark months stretch long and unforgiving, and with them comes a fear as chilling as the frozen ground beneath you. Winter is not just a season. It is a test of endurance, a shadow that creeps into your bones and tightens like a noose. The biting cold can kill as surely as any enemy's blade. Food stores dwindle, fires burn low, and the longhouses feel less like shelter and more like fragile islands in a sea of ice and darkness. You know that hunger gnaws at strength, and isolation breeds despair. The dread isn't just physical, it's the fear of being cut off, trapped in a frozen prison with no rescue in sight. You probably won't survive a harsh winter without careful planning, luck, and a stubborn will to keep fighting. Vikings prepared for winter with fierce determination, storing salted meat, dried fish, and grains to stave off starvation. But even the best preparations could fail. Crops might wither in a late frost, game animals could disappear. The thought of sitting by a dwindling fire, hearing the howl of the wind outside, and wondering if spring will ever return is a fear that haunts your nights. Historians still debate how severe Viking winters truly were compared to today's climate, and how much that influenced their seasonal migrations, raids, or farming cycles. But it's clear that winter shaped the rhythm of Viking life and fears. A quirky fact: Vikings sometimes used walrus ivory or reindeer antlers as tools to scrape ice or carve out snow shelters, showing resourcefulness in battling the elements. You might smile imagining someone using an antler as a multi-tool, primitive yet clever. Winter isn't just about cold and hunger. It's also about the long nights and the creatures that roam in darkness. Wolves and bears are more desperate for food and more dangerous, prowling closer to settlements. You might catch uneasy glances at the tree line, heart racing as the howl of a wolf pierces the silence. The psychological toll is as harsh as the physical. The fear of madness from isolation or despair is whispered among the clan. Long winters test not just muscles, but minds, and the stories told by firelight often carry warnings about spirits that wander in the dark, seeking the weak. Historians still discuss how Vikings coped with these mental strains. Did storytelling and ritual serve as vital lifelines against the creeping dread of winter? You can imagine how laughter, song, and feasting, even in limited form, were acts of rebellion against fear. And here's a lighter note. During the darkest days, Vikings celebrated Yule, a festival of light, feasting, and hope. The idea was to drive back the darkness, both literal and figurative, with fire and joy. So even in the grip of winter, the human spirit finds a way to flicker. So as the cold settles around you and the snow muffles the world, remember that winter is both an enemy and a teacher. It forces you to endure, to rely on kin, and to cherish the return of warmth. Your fear of winter is real, but so is your resilience. You step cautiously into the dense forest, the crunch of fallen leaves and snapping twigs echoing underfoot. The shadows between towering pines seem to shift and breathe, and every rustle feels like eyes watching, eyes belonging to wild beasts and something less earthly. Wolves, bears, and other predators stalk these woods, but it's the stories of mythical creatures lurking just beyond sight that keep your nerves taut. Wild animals are a constant threat, but the fear goes deeper. The Vikings believed that certain beasts were imbued with supernatural power, sometimes protectors, sometimes harbingers of doom. You might glance over your shoulder, half expecting to see a hulking troll or a shapeshifter emerging from the mist. The forest is alive with both flesh and legend, and the line between them blurs as daylight fades. You probably won't outwit the forest's darker denizens without respect and a bit of luck. Wolves are particularly feared. They hunt in packs, their howls piercing the night, and some tales speak of the legendary Fenrir's offspring roaming the earth. Bears, massive and powerful, could turn a hunting expedition into a fight for survival. The fear of being ambushed by these creatures keeps your senses sharp and your weapons close. Historians still debate how much of Viking mythology was inspired by real animal behavior versus pure imagination. Were trolls simply misunderstood bears or shadows cast by moonlight? Either way, the presence of wild beasts fed the Viking psyche's blend of fear and awe. A quirky tidbit. Vikings sometimes wore wolf pelts, believing the animal's spirit could protect and empower them. Imagine stepping into battle wearing the ghost of a wolf's might. That's a mix of courage and superstition hard to beat. The forest also represents a spiritual frontier. It's a place where you might encounter the vetter, nature spirits that could bless or curse travelers. Leaving offerings at tree roots or stone piles was common, hoping to appease these beings and avoid misfortune. You don't want to be the one who disturbs the sacred woods without respect. This respect is born from fear and tradition. Tales warn of travelers lost forever, swallowed by woods that close behind them. The fear of wandering into a magical trap or running afoul of spirits fuels caution in your steps. Historians still argue about the extent to which Vikings feared the wilderness versus mastering it. Some suggest that these stories served as warnings for survival. Others see them as reflections of a deep spiritual connection to nature's mysteries. And for a lighter touch, some sagas tell of clever heroes outwitting trolls by using their stupidity against them, proving that wit can sometimes defeat fearsome foes. As you navigate between ancient trees and whispering leaves, you carry the weight of this fear, a fear that sharpens your senses, grounds your steps, and reminds you that in the wild, you're never truly alone. You lie awake in your longhouse, the wind rattling through cracks in the wood, and the flicker of firelight casting strange shapes on the ceiling. It feels as if the walls themselves breathe, and you can't shake the feeling that unseen eyes watch from the shadows. Spirits of the dead, restless and vengeful, are never far from a Viking's mind, haunting not just graveyards but homes and hearths. These ghosts, or draugr, aren't the quiet ancestors you might expect. Instead, they are often described as dangerous beings who rise from their graves to torment the living. You imagine the cold touch of a spirit's hand, the eerie silence before a sudden chill, or the unsettling feeling that your every movement is being observed by something unseen. You probably won't ignore the warnings of restless dead without risking their wrath. The draugr are said to guard their burial treasures jealously, sometimes attacking those who disturb their resting places. Tales tell of Vikings returning from death to seek vengeance or protect their honor. This belief means that graves are treated with reverence and fear. You might find yourself offering sacrifices or performing rituals to keep these spirits at peace. Historians still debate whether these ghost stories were literal beliefs or symbolic expressions of death's lingering presence. Either way, the fear of spirits shaped burial practices and daily life. A quirky fact: some Vikings placed stones or iron objects on graves to lock the dead in place, preventing them from rising. It's like ancient ghost-proofing, practical and superstitious, rolled into one. Besides the draugr, Other spirits like the Huldra or forest spirits could also influence your fate. These beings might lure travelers into the woods or grant favors, always with a price. Fear of the unseen world shaped your interactions with nature and neighbors alike. The fear of spiritual attack is compounded by the belief in cider, a kind of magic practiced to communicate with or manipulate spirits. You might wonder if a neighbor's sudden illness is caused by curses or restless souls, and if you're safe from such powers yourself. Historians still argue how much Viking spirituality was integrated with daily fears and anxieties versus formal religious practice. What's clear is that the supernatural was a vivid and frightening part of life. And a lighter note, some sagas humorously recount encounters with ghosts who are more mischievous than malevolent, reminding you that not all spirits are out to get you. Some just want to prank the living. So as you lay in the flickering shadows, clutching your talisman and whispering prayers, remember that fear of the dead is a thread woven deeply into the Viking psyche, one that keeps you vigilant, respectful, and never quite alone. You watch the women of your village move through the longhouse with quiet strength, their hands busy weaving, cooking, or tending children. In Viking society, women are not just bystanders. They hold power, influence, and sometimes the very keys to your survival and security. The fear tied to women's roles is complex, both protective and unsettling, because their strength can build clans or unravel them, and their fates are intertwined with your own. Women manage the hearth, the heart of the home, and the keeper of traditions. You understand that angering a woman, whether wife, mother, or sister, can bring social chaos worse than any external enemy. Their power is subtle but profound, often expressed through alliances, marriage contracts, and control over household wealth. You might feel a flicker of anxiety, knowing that your honor and legacy rest as much on your partner's actions as your own bravery. You probably won't survive socially if you neglect the women who bind the clan together. Viking women could inherit property and manage farms, giving them a degree of independence unusual for the time. This economic power translates into social influence, and with influence comes the fear of losing face or status through failed relationships or betrayal. A woman's reputation can elevate or shame an entire family, a fact not lost on you. Historians still argue about the exact status and freedoms Viking women enjoyed, with some evidence pointing to considerable autonomy and other sources emphasizing strict patriarchal control. Either way, the fear of social disgrace or family breakdown due to women's roles was real and pressing. A quirky detail. Viking women might wear elaborate brooches and jewelry not just for decoration, but as symbols of status and power, signaling their clan's wealth and alliances. You might admire the gleam of silver and gold, but also feel the weight of expectations behind such displays. Women were also seen as keepers of fate and prophecy. The vulva, a female seer, wielded magic and spiritual authority that could inspire awe and fear. You might consult a seer before battle, wary of her words but hoping for guidance. The fear of a prophecy gone wrong or curses laid by these women lingered in your thoughts. Socially, the fear of shame was intertwined with women's roles. A dishonored woman, through infidelity or scandal, could bring ruin upon her husband and children. Maintaining honor was as much about protecting family reputation as fighting foes. Historians still debate how Viking men balanced respect and control in gender roles, with some suggesting women held considerable sway behind the scenes. The truth is probably a mix, with fear of losing social standing shaping many relationships. And a lighter note. Some sagas humorously depict women outwitting men, flipping the script, and reminding you that intelligence and wit are as valuable as strength in Viking society. So as you consider the women in your life, know that their power is both a source of strength and a wellspring of fear. In their hands lie the fortunes of clans and the fragile threads of legacy. You feel the weight of destiny pressing on your shoulders as the day's light fades and the cold north wind whispers secrets of things to come. Fate, word, is a force both cruel and certain, woven into the fabric of your existence by unseen hands. It's a truth that terrifies and consoles in equal measure. No matter your strength or skill, your path is laid out before you, your end already written. The fear here isn't just of death, but of helplessness, the idea that your choices might be meaningless against the grand design. You live and fight knowing that the Norns, those mystical weavers of fate, have spun your thread and will cut it at the destined hour. This knowledge brings both dread and a kind of fierce acceptance. You fight not to change your fate, but to meet it with honor. You probably won't escape your destiny no matter how hard you try, but that doesn't mean you stop trying. Vikings believed the Norns, three powerful women, controlled the past, present, and future, spinning life's threads at the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. Their decisions were final, mysterious, and terrifying. You imagine them sitting silently, weaving your life with indifferent fingers as you prepare for the battles and journeys ahead. Historians still debate how much Vikings saw fate as fixed versus flexible, and whether individual will could influence outcomes. But it's clear that the fear of being powerless against destiny shaped much of their worldview. This fear is tightly linked with courage. Knowing that your death is inevitable might seem paralyzing, but it also frees you to act boldly. You embrace bravery not as a denial of death, but as a way to meet it meaningfully. A quirky detail: some Vikings believed that tattoos and symbols could influence fate, a kind of magical insurance policy against bad luck. So you might find yourself sporting a carefully inked rune or beast to tempt fortune in your favor. The fear of fate's certainty also fuels the haunting prophecy of Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle that will end the gods and reshape the world. You live with the knowledge that even gods are not immune to destiny, and that chaos and destruction await all. Historians argue whether Ragnarok was a metaphor for natural cycles or a literal prophecy Vikings feared. Either way, it's a powerful reminder that fear isn't just personal, it's cosmic. And here's a lighter note. Despite fate's grip, Vikings loved to gamble and take risks, perhaps as a way to thumb their noses at destiny's seriousness, like saying, "Go ahead, Norns, I'm having fun till the end." So, as the night deepens and you prepare for tomorrow's unknown, remember, fate may bind your thread, but courage is the fire that burns despite it. You stand before the clan, the weight of their eyes heavier than any armor. In Viking society, fear wasn't just about the spear in your hand or the beast outside. It was the dread of shame, social death far worse than the cold embrace of hell. Honor is the currency of your world, and losing it means losing everything: respect, status, even your very identity. The fear of shame shapes your every action. A misstep in battle, a broken promise, or a whispered scandal can unravel your standing like a fraying thread. You know that your deeds will be told and retold by skalds, poets who immortalize your glory or expose your failures. The thought of becoming a cautionary tale, a figure of mockery, cuts deeper than any sword wound. You probably won't survive the social death that comes with dishonor. Viking law and custom revolve around reputation. Public opinion is fierce and unforgiving. Even a powerful chieftain can be brought low by accusations of cowardice or deceit. Blood feuds often ignite over perceived insults, and the cycle of revenge can consume entire families. Protecting your honor is as vital as guarding your life. Historians still debate how formalized these honor codes were, whether they were rigid rules or flexible social expectations, but their impact on fear and behavior is undeniable. A quirky note: Vikings used skop or skald poets not only to praise heroes, but also to shame enemies with biting satire. Imagine your failures sung in verses that echo through the halls, a fearsome fate indeed. The fear of shame also influences your choices in love, trade, and politics. Alliances are fragile, and a slight can shatter centuries of friendship. You must constantly navigate this web of expectations, knowing that one wrong word could cost you your place. Social shame can lead to exile or worse, a fate as feared as death itself. Being cast out means losing protection, community, and future. It's a lonely path where survival is a daily struggle. Historians argue how often such exiles occurred and whether they were permanent or sometimes temporary. For you, the fear is real either way. And a lighter thought. Some sagas show characters who cleverly restore honor through wit or bold deeds, proving that shame is a hurdle, not a tombstone. So as you face your kin, remember that your greatest battle may not be with sword or shield, but with the eyes and voices of your people. You stare at the smoke rising from your village, the flickering orange glow casting eerie shadows on the snow. Fire, wild, uncontrollable, and merciless, has claimed what you built with your own hands. The crackle of burning timber fills the air, drowning out the cries and curses. This is devastation at its most elemental, a nightmare that turns safety into ash in moments. Fire consumes not just your home, but your memories, your future, your very sense of security. The fear of fire is primal and absolute. A single spark can spread like wildfire, fueled by dry wood and fierce winds, leaving nothing but rubble and sorrow. You imagine standing helpless as the flames devour your longhouse, your mead, and your treasures, your family scattered and vulnerable. The terror isn't just loss, it's the exposure that follows, the cold nights without shelter, the hunger without stored food, the isolation. You probably won't survive the aftermath without the strength of your kin and sheer will. Vikings knew this well. Their homes were wooden structures, vulnerable to both accidental and deliberate fires. Raids often ended in burning villages, a weapon of war and terror designed to break spirits. The fear of watching everything go up in smoke was a constant companion, driving vigilance and swift defense. Historians still debate how much fire was a tool of conquest versus accidental disaster. What's clear is that fire shaped Viking tactics and fears alike. A quirky tidbit: Vikings used peat and turf to build houses that could resist fire better than plain wood. It's a bit like early fireproofing, primitive but practical. Fire also held symbolic power. It could cleanse, transform, and destroy. Ritual fires marked festivals, but uncontrolled flames were omens of doom. The fear that a fire might be the work of hostile magic or a curse added another layer of dread. Historians argue whether Vikings viewed fire primarily as a destructive force or as a sacred element to be respected. You can see how it was both. And here's a lighter note. Some Viking stories feature clever heroes who outwit fires or even use flames to trick enemies, showing that fire's fear can be turned into cunning advantage. As the embers die down and silence returns, you feel the bitter taste of loss but also the fierce determination to rebuild. Fire may burn your village, but it can never burn your spirit. You sit alone in the dark, the crackle of the dying fire barely audible as shadows play tricks on your weary mind. The fear stirring within isn't from a sword or a beast, but from something far more insidious: the fear of losing your mind. The Vikings were no strangers to the pressures that war, hardship, and isolation placed on the human psyche. Madness, though rarely spoken of openly, was a lurking dread, a shadow that could consume even the bravest warrior. You've heard the tales whispered in mead halls of warriors driven to frenzy, berserkers whose rage borders on madness, fighting with no memory or control. But madness isn't just wild fury. It can be creeping despair, paranoia, or haunting visions. The fear that your mind might betray you is a quiet terror that gnaws away at your soul. You probably won't admit to madness until it's too late. Viking culture recognized these struggles in mysterious ways. The concept of hammer, a shape or form, suggests a belief that the mind could be altered or even possessed by spirits. A warrior's sudden madness might be seen as a curse or a spiritual attack. You imagine being caught in that terrifying space where reality and nightmare blur, fearing the loss of self as much as loss to an enemy's blade. Historians still debate how Vikings understood mental illness, whether through supernatural explanations or early forms of psychological awareness. Regardless, the fear of the unknown within your own mind was real and potent. A quirky fact: berserkers were said to enter battle wearing animal skins, like bears or wolves, possibly using rituals or substances to induce their trance-like states. Imagine that wild energy fueled by both fear and desperation. The pressure to maintain courage and honor could push some beyond their limits, leading to breakdowns or altered states. But these moments were shrouded in mystery, often misunderstood and feared by clan and kin alike. Mental struggles might be hidden behind stoic faces, whispered about in private, or blamed on magic. The fear of being ostracized or seen as weak added to the torment. Historians still argue whether these descriptions of berserkers reflect actual psychological conditions or metaphorical storytelling. Either way, the fear of losing control over your mind lingers beneath the Vikings' fierce exterior. And a lighter thought: some sagas joke about warriors who faked madness to avoid fights or escape consequences, a clever, if risky, trick in a society that prized strength. So as you wrestle with unseen battles in your head, remember that the fiercest fight might be the one within yourself, and the greatest courage is holding on to who you are. You sit quietly beside the fire, the flickering flames reflecting in your eyes as you ponder a fear that gnaws not at your flesh, but at your very existence, the fear of being forgotten. To a Viking, your legacy, how you are remembered after death, is as vital as the life you lead. The dread of slipping into oblivion, of having your name erased from memory, is a shadow darker than any battlefield. Your tales, your deeds, your honor, they are the threads that weave your story into the clan's history. Without them, you risk fading into nothingness, your life a whisper lost in the winds. You probably won't survive the cold silence of being forgotten. Vikings placed enormous importance on storytelling and poetry. The skalds, those wandering poets, carried your legacy in their verses, singing of your bravery or failures. Your name lived on through sagas and songs, becoming immortal or infamous. The fear of being omitted or maligned by these stories is as terrifying as any physical threat. Historians still debate how much the Viking emphasis on memory shaped their culture and actions. Did the desire to be remembered drive raids and feats of strength? Likely so. Legacy was survival beyond death. A quirky tidbit: Vikings sometimes carved runestones to honor the dead, inscribing their names and deeds in stone for all to see. Early monuments to memory. Imagine the pride and fear of standing before a rock that proclaims your story for centuries. The fear of forgetting also ties into the belief in the afterlife. Valhalla and other realms are not just places of rest, but stages for continued honor. Being forgotten means losing that eternal place among the gods. Your ancestors taught you that life's meaning comes from being remembered, from the echoes you leave behind. The thought that your name might vanish into silence is a profound terror. Historians debate whether this fear was unique to Vikings or a common human condition, but it certainly shaped their fierce pursuit of fame and reputation. And here's a lighter note. Some sagas humorously recount characters who desperately try to make a name for themselves, sometimes with hilarious results. Legacy isn't always solemn. Sometimes it's a chaotic dance of ambition and folly. So as you stare into the fire's glow, remember that fear of forgetting drives you to live boldly, to carve your story into the world and the hearts of those who follow. The winds of change are whispering through your village, carrying news of foreign gods and strange rituals that unsettle your world. Christianity creeps into the north, challenging the old ways, the old fears, and the gods you've trusted for generations. This new faith, brings unfamiliar promises and threats, stirring anxiety about what is lost and what might be gained. The old fears don't vanish overnight. They mutate. You watch as neighbors abandon Thor's hammer for the cross, and you wonder if this shift will weaken your clan or protect it. The tension between tradition and change breeds uncertainty, a new kind of fear that grips your heart. Will the old God still hear your prayers? Will the new God offer true salvation or demand too much? You probably won't find peace in this spiritual upheaval without wrestling with doubt and loyalty. Christianity's arrival challenges your understanding of fate, honor, and the afterlife. The promise of heaven contrasts sharply with Valhalla's warrior feast and Hell's shadowy realm. This new doctrine forbids many of the old rituals and condemns magic and pagan gods as evil, forcing you to choose allegiance in a rapidly shifting world. Historians still debate how willingly Vikings embraced Christianity. Was it forced conquest, political convenience, or genuine belief? The fear and resistance surrounding this transition speak to the deep hold the old fears and gods had on your soul. A quirky fact: some Vikings blended beliefs, wearing Thor's hammer alongside Christian crosses, hedging their bets between worlds. It's like spiritual double-dipping, just in case. The new faith also brings new social orders and laws, sometimes disrupting the old clan hierarchies and alliances. The fear that your place in the world might be erased or diminished adds a sharp edge to this cultural transformation. You feel the tension at every feast, every gathering, old chants fading, new prayers rising. The fear of losing identity clashes with the hope for a different kind of future. Historians argue whether this religious shift was peaceful or violent, gradual or abrupt. Your experience is a mix of all these. And here's a lighter note. Some sagas poke fun at conversion stories, depicting humorous mishaps and misunderstandings as Vikings grappled with new gods and customs. So as you stand at the crossroads of faith, remember that fear and hope often walk hand in hand, shaping the future in ways both terrifying and inspiring. You've carried every fear, the biting cold, the howling wolves, the wrath of gods, and the cruel twist of fate, like stones in your pack as you journey through this fierce world. Now, all those threads pull together into a final haunting question. What did Vikings fear most? Beneath the roar of battle and the clamor of feasts lies a quiet terror, one that no sword could pierce, no prayer fully silence. It isn't just death they dread, that's the common tale, nor the monsters of myth or the wrathful gods. It's something deeper. The fear of insignificance, of being forgotten, unloved, and powerless in a universe that offers no guarantees. The ultimate fear is losing your place in the stories that give life meaning, and the courage to meet whatever comes with honor and a fierce heart. You probably won't escape this fear because it's stitched into the very fabric of being human, but it's also what drives you to live boldly. The Vikings' fear was wrapped in paradox. It was the source of their strength and their vulnerability. Facing monstrous beasts and hostile seas required courage born of fear. Accepting fate meant fighting all the harder. Honoring gods and ancestors meant confronting the unknown with faith and grit. Historians still debate whether Viking fear was unique or a universal human condition expressed through Norse culture's vivid imagery. What's undeniable is that fear shaped every choice, every story, and every life. Here's a final quirky thought. Vikings believed that even in death, your name could live on through song and story. So perhaps the greatest victory over fear is the story you leave behind. So as you close your eyes tonight, let the shadows fade and the warmth of courage fill you. Remember that fear is not the end. It's the beginning of every great story, every heroic journey, every whisper carried on the wind.